Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final session of Mental Well-Being for Cancer and Beyond, our webinar series hosted by the Stanford Cancer Survivorship Program. We've had an amazing number of sessions that we'll go through in more detail in a second. But first, I'd like to introduce myself and Martin, our hosts for today's session. My name is Parul Somani, and I'm the founder of Silver Linings, where I champion resilience, advocacy, and mental well-being. I work with organizations to help them better navigate professional and personal uncertainty. As a cancer patient and caregiver myself, I also am deeply passionate about patient empowerment, access, and healthcare transparency, and work with organizations to serve as the voice for patients. Martin.
Hello, everybody. Also from my side, my name is Martin Inderbitzin. I'm based in Switzerland, Europe. I'm also myself a person with the experience in cancer, like I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. From a background, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm very much interested in how the mind tells stories. So today we're going to talk a little bit about stories. And I also founded a patient initiative, which is called My Survival Story. So we document cancer survivors all around the world. And we both would like to welcome you very much to this fourth interactive session we're going to run today. I just wanted to say for all the newcomers, today it's going to be a bit interactive, and we always started the session with letting people write in the chat where you're from. So it's actually really fun to see like where people are calling in from all over the world. So if you haven't done yet, just let us know where you're from, and so we can get it started.
Absolutely. So today's session is the power of changing your story. And it is the first interactive workshop that we will be conducting in this series. The first session was Facing Cancer, What We Wish We Knew, where Martin and I shared our own experiences as cancer patients and caregivers. The second session was Why Mindsets Matter with Dr. Alia Crum, professor of psychology at Stanford, where we discussed the power of mindset and the impact our perception of stress has on our physical body. And then our third session was Managing Stress with Dr. David Spiegel, a professor of psychology at Stanford, on the topics of hypnosis and the power of support groups. In today's session, we'll be doing an interactive workshop on the power of changing your story, where our goal is to reflect on a current challenge that you may be facing, how being aware of what story you're telling yourself in regards to that challenge, how you might reframe it, and how you might change it and how that will be beneficial for you. Given it's an interactive workshop, we encourage you to have paper, pencil, pen, maybe even some coloring items available so that as we go through the exercises for today, you'll be able to participate along wherever you're dialing in from. As importantly as knowing what our goal for today's session is, it's also important to know what our goal is not for today. And one of our goals is not to necessarily be a therapy session or help you be able to fully solve that challenge that you're going through, but it is meant to be a step along the way of helping you think about the challenge and helping you empower yourself to change that story.
Yeah, so it's also important to mention that everything we do today, it's not for sharing, it's personal for you. So you do this for yourself on your piece of paper with your pen, and it will not hurt. So it's just playful. It's a little bit a playful interactive exercise, but probably can be pretty interesting and insightful for you to see what happens. So we would like to start the session with a question, and we would like to ask you to write down the answer for yourself, like what challenge or frustration are you facing today in your life? And always remember, you can pick something big, and probably then also bigger answers and bigger emotions will pop up, or you can also pick something small, like maybe it is related to your work, to COVID, to work with cancer, balancing your work balance, or maybe with the family, like something related to your cancer journey. Like try to pick something that you think is challenging at this moment, and then just write it down on your piece of paper. We give you just a moment to do that, so everybody has a little bit time to find something he or she wants to work on it today.
As those of you are writing down your challenges, it's great to see all of the people from around the world that have joined us today and are sharing their locations in chat.
Great. So I think probably everybody was able to pick a little challenge, which we're going to dive into today. And before we do that, we want to talk a little bit about emotions. Because when we talk about cancer, when we talk about our personal challenges, it's very normal that emotions pop up. And it's important to mention and to keep in mind that emotions are not good or bad. That is a misinterpretation, or let's say a tagging or a saying from many people, which is not constructive, that we say, okay, this is a good emotion and this is a bad emotion. A more constructive way to talk about emotions is to say emotions are comfortable or uncomfortable. And it's nothing to do with good or bad, they're just uncomfortable. And our ability to also sit in the uncomfortable emotion is very, very important, that we not just say, okay, we want to store them away and we just want to be happy. And especially in the cancer community, sometimes we observe, let's call it this toxic positivity, that we just say, yeah, you have to think positive and then everything is going to be fine and you're going to be healed. And we don't think that this is very, very helpful. It can put a lot of pressure on you, and it's not, how should I say, the right way to process emotions. Emotions, they have a function. Each emotion has a function. That's maybe also something very helpful for you to understand. When you look at anger, anger is something that activates us. It doesn't feel comfortable, but it somehow activates energy in us. Sadness slows us down, which is sometimes really good. And sadness is also showing us like what is important to us, which is kind of putting in a pole and saying like, okay, here's a flag. This is important to me. It's like a signal. Like stress. Stress is a warning signal. It tells you, hey, be careful. There is something wrong. Like you have to pay attention. Joy activates us, or disgust. I like also the emotion of disgust a lot, because it comes from a very physiological like rooting. It helps us initially to make sure we don't eat any rotten food. You see, so like every emotion has a function. So we should really be careful of not just saying, okay, this is good or bad and tagging the emotions. I like to say sometimes emotions are like your relatives, you know, like your bigger family. And so you have some of them you like a lot, and then you have others which you maybe not connect so well, or even you dislike a lot, but still they are a family. So they are part of the whole group, and they just belong together. So it's maybe a good picture you can keep in mind.
Absolutely. Well, and Martin, perhaps we can start out by, sharing a story of our own, an area in which our emotions are still uncomfortable in certain aspects of our journey. Both of us have taken our experiences as cancer patients and turned them into something with meaning that we find fulfillment from. And many might view us as being very positive about our experience, about our journey, and having sort of moved forward. But that's not always the case, right? What's an example of a time or an experience that you still have where your emotions are uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Parul, because especially sometimes people look at us and say, Parul and Martin, they're always so positive and everything runs so easy. That's not the case. We also have this backstory and emotions which are tricky for us. For me, one situation which I struggle since 9 years, because I have a cancer journey since 9 years, are the control scans. I have scans every 3 months because I have kind of chronic development of my illness. So every 3 months I'm in the tube, and these days before I go into the tube is really challenging. And then of course getting the results. So no matter what I do, what kind of technique, with meditation, with journaling, whatever, like sport is for me a big thing, it still is very emotional. So the only thing I learned is that it's never getting normal. So the only thing that becomes normal, that it's actually never getting normal. Yes, that's a personal story that I struggle like every 3 months again and again. And what about you, Parul? Do you have also situations or in the past that you still struggle with your emotionality?
Yeah, even what you shared really resonates because, I was diagnosed with breast cancer now exactly 7 years ago as of yesterday. And the screenings for that continue, but my cancer was driven by a genetic mutation. And so I also have an elevated risk of ovarian cancer. And so then there's these ongoing screenings that need to happen for that, and surgeries still to come, that I still, grapple with facing that risk and wanting to do something about it. But, beyond the scanxiety that you mentioned, one area that's different, that really impacted my emotions in a way I never necessarily expected, is that, I was 31 years old when I was diagnosed, and my husband's birth mother was actually 31 years old when she passed away of breast cancer. And it really changed my view of just looking at the picture of her that we have in our home and thinking about how she had 2 young children when she passed away, and how I, have 2 young children when I was diagnosed. And it really impacts me to just think about what she went through and what was left behind. And like, while it fills me with sadness to think about that experience, it also reminds me to be so thankful that I am still here, and I have the opportunity to watch my daughters grow up. And for those of you who may have joined a bit later, we had asked everyone earlier to write down a challenge or a frustration that they're currently facing. So if you haven't done that already, please start by first writing out the challenge that you're facing, that you want to reframe your story around, and then begin drawing your emotion like Martin just described.
Great. So we give you a minute or two. Just see what comes out and don't judge it. Just let it draw. So I slowly bring it to an end. You're always invited to finish your drawing also after the workshop, but we also want to dive into like the second part of the exercise. Now, we're just curious to see, like, or hear maybe if somebody wants to share in the chat, like, how was that? What did come up? Was it easy or not? Or did you relate to the picture that you see now? Does it reflect what you feel? We're really curious. And I also saw in the chat, somebody was writing the movie Inside Out is a good movie for talking in a normal way about emotion. I can highly agree on that. It's really a really good, well produced movie.
Absolutely agree. My daughters love that movie. And so it's a great way to not just teach children about emotions, but I think in many ways that movie was created for adults.
Yes, totally. Okay, so we have some chronic back pain, potentially chemo. So let us know what was the process and how it felt to draw that on a piece of paper. Surprised to see a raisin emerge as I drew. undeterred and determined. Yes, it felt good. Carry rides.
I think we're seeing both sides of emotions being drawn. We have someone sharing a stoic face with a teardrop, which can just provide visualization to what it is that they might be feeling. And yet we also have others sharing that it's actually therapeutic for them to just be drawing it out and actually realizing, you know, some strength that they might be feeling or aspiring for.
Yeah. So making an abstract picture of like what you feel can be a first step. And the second step can be to try to name actually what you feel and put it into words. Now, when it comes to our vocabulary, it's very interesting that we don't have a very big variation in describing our emotions. When we ask people like, how are you? They say, yeah, good, or so la la, or bad, or I'm stressed or bored. And that's it, more or less. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. And so we prepared for you a little slide with some additional like words, emotional words that maybe can inspire you if you want to describe now what you have on your piece of paper. So just see quickly like what people write. Emotions are like the COVID chart, sometimes up, sometimes way down. Yeah, that's a funny one. That's so true, Sarah. All right, so let me share with you the slide with emotional vocabulary that can maybe inspire you or give you a little bit a feeling of like actually how fine-grained our emotions can be. And this is now a collection of words which focus more a bit on the uncomfortable emotions. Pay attention, I'm not saying the bad emotions, they're just uncomfortable. But we could also show you a slide with like emotions who are in the comfortable area. So maybe that can help you to like describe a bit better like what you were actually putting on your drawing on your piece of paper.
As our participants are adding their emotional vocabulary words to their photographs and their drawings, you know, I'd like to talk about one of the comments that's in chat where Carrie shared that one of her biggest challenges is trying to figure out how to move on with life. And I think it's interesting to read those words move on, because I think that also implies putting the entire experience that you just went through or are going through on a back burner and just tying it with a bow and not really thinking about it again and just trying to move on past it. And I like to actually reframe that as thinking about how to move forward. Well, we all need to continue to take that next step and proceed forward. It doesn't necessarily mean it's moving on and forgetting what has happened in the past. And it's about understanding the emotions that you tie with the experience and thinking about how can you perhaps create meaning out of the experience that you've gone through? How can you understand how it's actually strengthened you? And how can then you apply that to other aspects of life, of your life, as you move forward?
Yeah, it's very, very beautiful said, Parul. It has a lot to do with acceptance, you know, like the uncomfortable emotions also carry rights. Now we definitely cannot forget, we want to get rid of it, and it feels uncomfortable. That's why we don't want them, and it takes a lot of practice and acceptance and self-love to actually hug all these emotions, like also the uncomfortable relatives. You also have to give them a hug when you meet them for Christmas. It's maybe similar to that. So I'm gonna slowly stop this slide for the vocabulary. I hope it was helpful. As we said, it's also a practice to understand that emotions are not just like happy or sad, but you have very big of variation of like what kind of emotions we actually can experience, and like naming that. Why did we choose that exercise or that little playful drawing challenge? Because And we are curious now to hear if this is something that you also observed, that it's a difference that you were putting it now on paper and describing. Did you see anything changing in like how you relate to the challenge or what you have inside? We're really curious to hear from you. So let's take a look at the chat. Also, if you have questions, you can put that in the Q&A. We have both windows open to try to keep track of that. I can't wait until life is not hard and I'm trying hard to be happy. Some days are easier than others. You know, this is the funny thing with this happiness. We always try to be happy and we think if you're not happy, something is wrong. But sometimes life is just not so comfortable. Life is just, I mean, forgive me the word, but sometimes life is really, really hard. Like, and then we get like into this stress and say we want to be happy and we push us even further, and that can sometimes not be helpful. So just taking it slow and accepting that where you are is actually not, it doesn't have to be a bad place. I heard once a good saying from a meditation teacher, and she told me, Martin, look, every experience is exactly the right experience in the right moment. And I was struggling at this time in my life, and I was looking for advice, and I was listening to that, and somehow it resonated with me, because it can also open a door and help you to realize something, but it's not always easy to accept.
Yeah, I see in chat that many participants have shared some of the feelings that they have been experiencing or perhaps wrote about, you know, whether it's feeling abandoned or betrayed. Carrie shared she felt she was able to release some of the anxiety she was feeling. And I think it's important, like you mentioned, Martin, earlier around toxic positivity, that the expectation isn't to necessarily be blindly positive all the time. And it's okay to recognize that these are emotions that each of us are individually experiencing in our own ways, and that it's okay to feel that. And it's very normal to feel that. And it is part of the journey and part of how we cope to feel those emotions. And the important part of what everyone is doing right now is going through the exercise of becoming aware, right? Maybe there are some of these emotions you're already maybe too aware of, that you're like, you know, drowning in that. But to go through this exercise and think about what are the variety of emotions, right? Martin shared that list of so many different words that can actually provide more nuanced description of what we're all feeling. And being able to recognize what the variety of emotions are that you're feeling, and recognizing that those don't define who you are, right? It's not that I am sad, it's that I am feeling sad. And that those emotions can be fleeting based on how we decide to face them and move forward from them.
Yeah, it's very well said. It's like we are not our emotions. We feel them, but we are not. And I also want to pick up a comment from the chat from Julia, who is writing, I try to give my feelings time. I said myself, it's okay if it takes 3 years until I feel okay again. I love that. You know, we're living in a society which we always try, everything has to be faster and quicker. And there is a beautiful saying my dad told me once, I think he's actually in the call today, and he said, look, the grass doesn't grow faster if you pull it. And I love that quote. It's some stuff and some things in our lives just need time, and it is up to us to just sit in that and hold that time. So yes, I see a lot of comments coming in.
Excellent.
We are the sky, emotions are the weather. That's also a beautiful one. And it's just passing. It's a beautiful picture. Yes, Parul, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just, you know, even that quote, we are the sky, emotions are the weather, kind of reminds me it's a good transition into the topic of mindset that we want to talk about. And, you know, we'll talk more about emotions and how mindsets compare to them. But perhaps we can start off by understanding our audience's view about mindset and whether that's something that they believe can be changed. So let's start our next
mindset. It's interesting. We learned with Alaya in the second session, like the mindset is somehow a story we tell ourselves in our head, and it can affect how we feel. And so we started now the whole session with feeling and say, okay, how do we feel? And now in the second part, we want to see, okay, what happens if we actually try to tweak a little bit the story we have in our heads? So that's what we're going to try to do.
So let's first get a sense from the audience of how many people believe or feel that they're able to change their own mindsets. So let's start with our next poll, which is, do you believe you can change the mindset you associate with your challenge, the one that you're thinking about today? Please go ahead and share if it's easy for you, you'd like to but struggle, or don't believe it's possible for yourself.
Interesting. We see now live how the answers coming in.
Yeah.
It's actually really cool. We give you a little bit more time. And Sushana was sharing a book recommendation from Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset. Yes, that's a very, very interesting book. For those of you who don't know it, I can recommend it a lot.
Yes, it's called Mindset, the Psychology of Success, where she distinguishes between a fixed mindset where you believe your skills are what they are. They're fixed in terms of what your capabilities are. So if something feels hard, you're less likely to try harder and persevere because you take that setback as being personal, versus a growth mindset where you believe that you can learn from your mistakes and learn from your challenges and grow from them. And as a result, are more likely to continue trying and persevere. All right. So if we end the poll here, we can see that some of our participants do believe in their ability to change their mindset, and even as it pertains to this particular challenge. And yet we see the large majority, 3/4, are perhaps joining this workshop because they would like to change the mindset that they have about this challenge, but are struggling to do so.
And I think it's totally normal. I mean, I'm really happy to see that nobody said, no, it's impossible. It is possible. And it's not something that we're just born with, that we are good mindsetters, like it's a practice, it's a skill. And so it's totally like, if you now voted for this, I would like to change, but I struggle, like it's not a bad character or you're weak or something. It's just totally normal that it's not coming like intuitively. So, but that's what we're going to do today, no?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about mindsets, right? We talked about this difference between fixed and growth mindsets, but how do we think about mindsets and how they pertain to emotions, and what did we learn in the Why Mindsets Matter session with Dr. Crum, right? It was thinking about how mindsets are not your emotions, right? Like we talked about, it's perfectly normal and okay to feel that roller coaster of emotions, whether it's sadness or denial or frustration and sadness. And yet I think about mindsets as being the environment in which those emotions live, right? Dr. Crum shared how our mindsets aren't fixed. They're not something that we're born with, but they're shaped by our environment and the people that we interact with, our family, our friends, and even our care teams. And it's the belief that we have about a certain experience. And when we think about those mindsets as being the environment for our emotions, the more positive those mindsets are, the more hopeful that they are, the more likely your emotional roller coasters are going to be able to move into acceptance and that new normal and moving forward quicker and more productively. And yet the more toxic and negative your mindset is, those emotions of sadness are more likely to get lengthened and take longer. And so when we think about mindsets, what's important to remember, it is that they're a choice, that we have the choice of what mindset we're going to have, what belief we're going to have, what intent and vision we're going to have for the future. And it's something that, just by first recognizing what mindset we're having, how we might want to change it is a first step of the journey.
Yes, and Alaya Crum also shared this very interesting relationship with how do we think about stress? Like do we think stress is really, really bad and really dangerous, or do we think stress is something that actually helps us to overcome adversity? And obviously, like we all know in this call, like cancer is very stressful. And I don't want to say, no, it's all fine and stress is cool, but stress is not only bad, it's not only black and white. So stress can also help you to activate your system. When you have to perform, you are stressed. I mean, stress is a multi-billion-dollar industry, you know, like when you go to a roller coaster in Disneyland or whatever, like you expose yourself to stress. It's not just like something bad. And what we try to do now today is to rewrite a little bit the story that we have in our head, and see like how that actually affects our feeling, and maybe also how we feel about this challenge or the problems we are facing all in our lives. Should we dive into the exercise, Parul, or do you want to add something to the wrap up from Parul and the other sessions?
No, I think that was great. I think we do have a question in the Q&A that we could address before shifting into the exercise, where Eileen shares that she struggles with how to respond to people who say, I know you will beat this because you are strong. And I think many of us have been there where we've heard that. I think one step is to remember the intention that person is coming with, right? And that they're well-intentioned in what they're saying, but what they're saying might just not be landing with us correctly, because we don't necessarily want to feel that if things are not going well, that it was because we weren't strong enough, or we didn't fight hard enough, or that it was something that was entirely within our control. And so there's, you know, Martin, what are your thoughts on how someone?
No, it's a wonderful question, and I think you have a very good point. People say stuff like this because they want the best for you. What you also can do is state what you need. You know, you can answer such a saying, say, hey, look, this is not what I need. I need you to just be with me here in this space, and I don't feel good. You know, like if you're able to verbalize, and here are we talking again about emotional vocabulary, you are able to state what you actually need now from this person. Maybe the person can give it to you. You have to always remember that it's not only you as a patient who is overwhelmed, but also your environment. And it's also a first time, or maybe not, but for many, it will be a first time to relate to somebody with cancer. And so you can also help them to tell them what you need and where they can meet you and what is not helpful for you. But a very, very good question. Thank you, Eileen, for posting that. So yeah, I think then we would say, let's start into the mind setting and like working a little bit on our own story. What do you think, Parul?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we take a fresh piece of paper and we start the following. You're going to finish the following sentence. I struggle with X, Y, Z, and just name something that you struggle with, a challenge I struggle with, and then just write whatever comes first. Don't judge it. Just see what happens. All right. So we're not going to make that too long, because if you're overthinking it, it's maybe not so authentic.
We'll give them just a little bit more time before we move on to the next sentence for them to write. Okay.
All right.
If you've had the opportunity to write down your sentence of I struggle with, now we'd like you to write a sentence of it is hard for me because.
And try to find arguments why it is hard. Maybe you have 2, 3, mention something why it's hard. All right. Now, before we're gonna turn this whole story, of course, we are curious to hear how does that make you feel. So finish the following sentence. This makes me feel, and then just see what comes up. So Sharon is asking the question again. So the first question was, I struggle with, I quickly repeat. Then the second question is, it is hard for me because, and you write down why it's hard for you. And now we are in the third question is like, this makes me feel, and you describe like what you're feeling.
Martin, question for you that we could maybe ask the audience to think about as well is, as they think about what they're currently facing and what they're currently feeling, should we have them also write down what and how would they like to feel? Recognizing the context of the environment that
that's a good idea.
Recognizing only what they can control, that there are uncontrollable factors in their environment and in their situation, but within the context of what they're living in and living with, perhaps our next sentence could actually be, how would you, I would like to feel XYZ.
Good point. And allow yourself to write it down, also if you don't feel it, dare to write it down, how you would like to feel. I also see, before we move in the second part of the exercise, a very nice comment in the chat. I struggle, from Sarah, I struggle with the feeling, here. I struggle with the feeling like my world is no longer the world of others who don't have cancer. Well, this is a truth. I mean, it is doesn't mean that you're totally separated forever, but it is separating the experience you have they never had if they didn't have cancer, and so it can be alienating, and it can feel very separated. But on the other side, it also opens a new world, because you will meet people like here in this group or on other places that you can connect on a deeper level, in another level that you will not have been able without that. So I'm not saying this is good or bad, but it's just the truth. Like, it can be, I don't know how it was for you, Parul, but it can be very separating.
So, Martin, it reminds me of something we discussed in our first session of, facing cancer and what we wish we knew, where I talked about how I felt like chemotherapy aged my body, but it also matured my mind. And when I think about this sentence in chat of, feeling like the world is not, of those who don't have cancer, I also feel like it's not the world that I was living in for myself before I had cancer, because but while that is in some ways challenging, it's also thinking about in which ways has it been strengthening. And when I think about how my mind has matured from that experience, it's also realizing that, in my particular case, having gone through an experience in my 30s has made me view the world differently and made me more clear on what's important in life and what my priorities are at a much earlier age than I maybe otherwise would have. And that's actually a blessing, right? It's informing how I want to live whatever years I have left. And so while yes, our experiences are different and the world is different, there's good that can be found in that as well.
And it's, in the end, it's an invitation not one that you were signing up for, but somehow it's an invitation to look at that. Very well said, Parul. All right, what do you think? Should we move to the second part?
Let's do it. Yes.
So what we're going to try to do now, and this is really like approach it as a creative writing exercise. So we're going to try to change the story that you have in your mind, like to change a little bit, at least, the mindset. And so the first invitation, and that's an invitation to all of you out there, is that you take the same challenge that you were starting the exercise with, finishing the sentence, I struggle with, and now you write the sentence, I learned to cope with, and you write down the same challenge. And so the trick about that, also if you don't know how to cope with your pain, how to cope with your fear of anxiety, how to cope with that, you can write down, I can learn to cope. And learning is a very powerful word. So we start the exercise with this, I can learn to cope with.
And I would even suggest to write it down and then read it out loud to yourself, right? Like say it to yourself.
Good point. Like read it out loud to your own mind. So your mind can actually listen. And then just observe how that feels. That doesn't mean that you know it already, but just, yeah. Okay, so once we have that, we're going to ask you the following. Then you can, again, it's a creative writing exercise. Write down whatever comes into your head. What is needed that you can learn that? Like what can help you or who can help you? What do you need to learn that? And it's important that you don't try to solve a gravity problem. You know, if you say, yeah, what is needed is that I'm cancer free. Yeah, that's obvious that we all want that. So try to find resources or people or things that can help you that are within reality and within your reach. It's not, no, I'm not saying it's not a reality that you can become cancer free, but you know what I mean.
Things that are controllable.
Thank you, Parul. I mean, well, that's a philosophical question, or maybe cancer is also, we can also do a lot. Yeah, but you know what I mean, yeah. So write down everything that comes into your mind. What can help you or who can help you so you can learn to cope with your challenge.
As you're thinking about your challenge and you're thinking about declaring to yourself that you want to learn to cope with it, you're writing down what, you know, are steps that you can take, what are people you can reach out to support you, you know, in these controllable factors. And part of it is remembering that one of those people might actually be yourself, right? Mm-hmm. That choice of mindset that you can have, like you might be the person that can best help you in certain factors that are, you know, part of your challenge, recognizing within the context of what you can actually control. So as you think about wanting to learn to cope and, you know, thinking about the words that you wrote about how you want to feel, right? The next question for you is to think about what are small steps that you can start taking even today to get you closer to those aspirational feelings and get you closer to how you want to feel and how you can best cope.
And with small steps, we really think small steps. It's very important. This is not the achiever club here. It's like, I like what you said, Parul, like to find like who you are and be authentic to what you need. And I just want to pick up a comment from Rosemary, who writes, my brain fog makes me feel dumb and sometimes like it will never be the same. I used to feel more optimistic, but as time goes on and it's still there, it's harder and harder. And so I know how you feel. I mean, I have been in very similar places where I was on my sofa, I couldn't do anything. I felt brain fog, I felt sad, I felt depressed. And you can ask yourself, okay, what do you need now? You know, I was taking my phone and playing really stupid games that I normally don't find interesting. And I just like took it slow. So I realized, okay, I have to take it slow. I have to be best friend with myself and trust that it will go over and take it slow. So that's what I mean with take a small step. It's not about, okay, you have to push yourself and go out and I don't know, ask yourself what you need. That's the most important.
Yeah, you know, it similarly an example for my brain fog and realizing my memory is not the same as it used to be, and I don't necessarily always think as sharply as I once did, is one, recognizing that, right? And just being aware that that is a change I've gone through, enabled me to then take the action of like, okay, well, what is it something that I can do to help combat that? And one of the things I started doing is writing everything down. Like if you know, like in terms of a to-do list, but on my phone, so it's always accessible, is even the slightest thing that comes to mind of, you know, a call that needs to be made or a form that needs to be submitted, is writing it down so that I know I may not remember this in 5 minutes. And so if it's written down, at least that's a way I've empowered myself to still stay on top of whatever it is that needs to get done.
Very good practical tip. So
I just see a comment in chat where LS shared that every time they see a negative report in their scans and tests, it stagnates their growth mindset. And, you know, I've tried to teach my own daughters about fixed mindset versus growth mindset and the importance of like learning from the challenges. And there was this one day where my younger daughter, you know, at the time only 6 years old, got really upset and frustrated by something. And she goes, "Mommy, my growth mindset isn't working today." And it was just the cutest thing, because I was also filled with pride that she even knew what a growth mindset is. But it's also a reality that there are so many, you know, days, like hours in a day and days in a week, that children and adults, all of us, feel that it can be hard to keep that growth mindset on and like keep that sort of learning and, you know, attitude on. And it goes back to recognizing that those emotions are okay to feel, and those emotions are temporary in nature, but believing in that mindset that you ultimately want to come back to, that's where the power lies.
Yeah, totally. And as you say, it's a practice thing. And it's also like, if one day we don't feel like having a strong growth mindset, that's okay too. So now what I would like to invite you to do is to ask you, like, the second story that you wrote down now, how does that make you feel? Can you name some words to it? Like, how does it make you feel when you see now the second part of the exercise? And maybe you want to take up the two stories and compare, like scan the first one and observe in your body, like, how does the first story make you feel? And then like scan through the second story and see what happens. And then of course we're curious to hear if it's the same, or if you observe a difference, or what your personal experience is. Also, if you have another question, you can also place that in the Q&A. We have a question which is asking about combining chemo with alternative therapy, which I would just like to hand over to specialists. Parul and I, we are both not medical doctors, so I'm not sure, but I think we are not the right persons to ask, despite we have a lot of personal experiences. But I think the best is you ask somebody from the medical team around that. So Catherine, right, my second story allowed me to be more positive about my own reactions. I realized that I'm actually doing better than I thought. That's interesting. Thanks, Catherine, for sharing that.
I'd love to hear from others as well on how they felt writing down what their challenge was and how that was making them feel, and how that now compares to how you want to feel, and how it feels to be able to say that I can learn to cope with this.
Yes, and it's sometimes interesting that just a little shift of focus can help us to shift our emotions. You know, when you talk about statistics, when it comes to cancer, you can always look at the statistic that you're going to die, or you can look at the statistics that you're going to live. You always have both numbers. And also if the one is smaller than the other, the question is on which one are you focusing on, and like, how does that focus affect how you feel?
I think it's so important to think about the small steps that you've written, and spend more time after today's workshop reflecting on these exercises, reflecting on these questions, taking more time to write down your responses to them if you need that, and really thinking about what are those small steps that you can start taking today. And as you've begun to take them, really celebrating that, right? Celebrating those small wins and the completion of those small steps, because even just realizing what you can control and what otherwise feels very uncontrollable can be very empowering, and just taking control of that.
Yes. Yes, such a good point, and such a good way to wrap it up. Like, in the end, it's about giving yourself also the compliment when you do move a little bit, just a little bit into the direction you want to move. Yeah, so we have, yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I love what Melissa has shared, which is how that first story felt really shaky and she felt this tightness in her body. But by saying that she can learn to cope with it, and sort of, you know, acknowledging that there's self-compassion and self-love, she's now feeling like she's taking a deep breath and she's allowing herself acceptance and more confidence. And I think that's amazing to be able to reframe something, reframe a challenge or a hardship in your mind, and be able to feel those more positive or productive emotions, and recognizing that we've applied that today to one particular challenge that you've written down, but it can apply to any of life's hardships or frustrations, whether they're related to your cancer journey or just for anyone, you know, in your lives, the daily frustrations or those kind of bigger unknowns that they might be facing.
Yeah, so good. Thank you for sharing all that. And it's always a good reminder that, you know, like, there are always two cancers. One is in the body and one is in the mind. And it's up to us. It's the ultimate decision we can make if we also want the cancer invade our mind and our heart and our soul. So yes, it was a pleasure to work with you, and that you all joined for this interactive session. We want to thank, of course, the Stanford Cancer Survivorship Program to making that happen. It was a pleasure for Parul and me to do that. We will also contact you to give us some feedback, which will be very, very helpful for us to improve that format, to see what worked well and what not. And yes, Parul, I think all the recordings will be online one day, no?
Yes, and I've shared the link in chat earlier on. I can share it again here just now. It's at the Stanford Health Library. I believe the recordings for our first two sessions are already live that can be viewed. And the previous session on managing stress and the recording for today's session will also be made available live in the coming days. And we look forward to hearing your feedback on what you enjoyed and what could be better. And we hope you reflect on all of the learnings that you've had from these sessions and find a way to embrace them and practice them in your lives and improve your mental well-being and help others that you cross along the way as well. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.